What happens when a respected black CEO is pulled from a flight just for looking too successful for his own ticket? He stays silent until silence costs too much. What he does next brings the whole country to a standstill. You ever have one of those mornings that looks like it's going to be smooth, where the sun hits just right, your coffee ain't burned, and for a split second, you think life might actually give you a break? That was Elijah Robinson, 6:45 a.m., Los Angeles International Airport. He wasn't just any man in a suit. He was the suit. Clean-cut, tall, sharp eyes, walking like he owned the runway instead of boarding a flight. A black man with presence. Not loud, not flashy, but with the kind of calm that comes from building a tech company out of nothing and turning it into an AI empire in 4 years flat. Elijah had more patents to his name than most of the execs at Fortune 500, but you wouldn't hear that from him. He didn't need to talk big. His name did that for him. He was headed to New York, business class. Atlantic Equity had booked the meeting themselves. A $500 million deal was on the table. $500 million. That wasn't just money. That was a power shift. That was the kind of deal that puts your face on magazine covers and your voice in every boardroom from Silicon Valley to Wall Street. But just before heading to the gate, Elijah noticed something. A woman. Maybe late 30s, Latina, flustered and clearly overwhelmed. Her little boy clung to her hand like a lifeline, eyes wide with confusion. The airline rep was trying to help, but it was going nowhere fast. Language barrier, system error, take your pick. Now, Elijah could have walked on. Man had a billion reasons to keep moving, but something about that kid, maybe the way his small fingers were gripping his mom's coat, maybe the fear in his eyes, made Elijah stop. He stepped up, calm and respectful. "Ma'am, do you need help?" She nodded quickly. He didn't lecture, didn't patronize, just got to work. He translated, rebooked their flight, printed the passes, and personally walked them across the terminal to the right gate. Before saying goodbye, he bent down and handed the boy a keychain. His company's logo. "You're going to be just fine, all right?" The boy nodded and cracked the smallest smile. It was a quiet act of kindness. No cameras, no audience. Just a man doing what was right. And then, the whiplash. Elijah made his way back to gate 47A. He handed over his boarding pass with a polite smile. But before he could take 2 steps, he heard it. "Sir, we need you to come with us for a moment." He blinked, turned. 2 TSA officers, one older, built like he never smiled a day in his life. The other young, twitchy, like he was still learning how to stand up straight. "Problem?" Elijah asked, calm as ever. "We need to verify your documents," said the older one, already sounding bored. Elijah handed over his passport and ticket. His name was right there, his face clear as day. The young one squinted. "This your ticket?" Elijah tilted his head. "Is that a serious question?" "Just seems a little out of place, that's all." There it was, that familiar tone, that coded language every black man over 40 knows in his bones. Out of place, as in, how dare you look like money if you didn't steal it? He didn't argue, he knew the game. The more you push, the worse they treat you. So he walked, past families, past businessmen, past women in Lululemon, none of whom were being asked where they got their tickets from. They took him to a side room, beige walls, buzzing lights, the smell of old coffee and fluorescent injustice. First came the luggage check, then the pat-down, then the questions. "Where are you headed?" "Business or personal?" "What does your company do?" "You sure this ID is real?" That one almost made him laugh, but he didn't. He didn't give them the satisfaction. For nearly 40 minutes, they picked through his life like he was carrying secrets instead of a laptop. And all the while, his gate sat just around the corner. They knew he had a flight. They knew it was leaving. And when it finally ended, when they ran out of nonsense to justify keeping him, the older agent handed him his things like it was no big deal. "You're free to go, sir. Everything checks out." No apology, no explanation, just that flat tone, like they hadn't just made him miss the most important meeting of his year, maybe of his life. He stepped out in time to watch the gate close, the jetway retract, the plane pull away. There it went, opportunity, flying off the runway, and they didn't even blink. He stood there, watching that plane lift into the sky, his jaw clenched. Not because he missed it, but because he knew exactly why. Not a mix-up, not a random check. This wasn't about security. This was about visibility. They saw a black man in a suit with first-class confidence and didn't believe it. Because deep down, people like them think success comes with a certain skin tone, and it ain't his. And the worst part, they'd go home tonight, eat dinner, maybe even brag about how they did their job. And Elijah? He'd have to explain why a $500 million deal might now be dead in the water, all because he helped a woman and her son, and had the nerve to look like he belonged where he was. What happened next changed everything. You do not want to miss how this unfolds. You ever sit in a room full of people and still feel like you're completely alone? Not because nobody's talking to you, but because none of them know what it's like to carry your whole identity like it's a suspicious package? Elijah Robinson sat in the waiting area of LAX with a straight back and a locked jaw, laptop closed, jacket folded neatly over his arm. He'd already rebooked a later flight to New York, but that wasn't the problem. The problem was bigger than the flight. The problem was what had just happened, and worse, how normal it felt. He picked up his phone. Notifications were lighting up like a Christmas tree in July. One video. That's all it took. Some passenger had filmed the moment TSA walked Elijah away like he had a bomb in his briefcase instead of a billion-dollar business plan. No words exchanged. No real reason given. Just two agents, one black man, and the look of public suspicion that's way too familiar. The caption under the video read, CEO or suspect. Guess it depends on the skin tone. And the comments, they came in hot. This is why we talk about systemic racism. A Harvard grad with a Forbes cover still ain't safe. You know how rich you gotta be for them to let you breathe in peace if you're black? More than a billionaire, apparently. This ain't just about Elijah. This is about all of us. Enough is enough. Elijah didn't ask to go viral. He didn't need the clicks or the sympathy. He wasn't looking to be the face of a movement. He was just trying to get to a meeting. But that video, it didn't care what he wanted. It was out there now. And it had momentum. The phone rang. It was his assistant, Marlene. Voice sharp, urgent. Your name's trending everywhere, she said. News crews are already reaching out. New York Times wants an interview. CNN's asking if they can send a car. And Elijah, Inequality saw the video. They're waiting to hear if you're still flying out. He didn't answer right away. He just stared at the screen like it might blink back some kind of answer. That agent's voice came back clear as day. You sure this is your ticket? That's what stuck with him. Not the pat down, not the luggage search. That question. It wasn't just words. It was a reminder that no matter how far he climbed, no matter how clean the suit or high the IQ, some folks still only saw him as a potential problem. Another call came through, this time Atlantic Equity. Oh, Mr. Robinson, Richard Manning here. Listen, we saw the footage. Honestly, we're disgusted. It's shameful. We're so sorry. If you still want to meet, we can reschedule. Just say the word. We'll work around you. Elijah didn't yell, didn't lecture. He just let the silence stretch. Manning's voice started to crack a little on the other end. But Elijah wasn't ready to speak, because the more he thought about it, the less he wanted to explain himself. Again, this wasn't a bad day. It was the blueprint. It was the invisible wall built into the system, the kind you don't see until you slam face first into it. And then they tell you to calm down like you're the problem for noticing. He ended the call without a word. Later that night, he sat in his sister's kitchen in Pasadena. Her kids were asleep. The house was quiet. Safe. The kind of quiet that made you feel everything louder. He pulled up the video again. Now it had over 700,000 views. And the comments? They'd changed. They weren't just angry, they were personal. My son saw this. He asked me why that man looked like Daddy. I didn't know what to say. I work in tech. Been there, same questions, same treatment, but you stood there like a rock. You're not alone, brother. We're watching. We're with you. And suddenly it hit him. This wasn't just a moment. This was a microphone, not one he asked for, but one that had been put in his hand by injustice, by ignorance, by a system that still hadn't figured out that black excellence isn't something to fear. Elijah took a deep breath. Something was shifting inside him. It wasn't rage anymore. It was resolve. This is it, the turning point. Everything you've been waiting for, it's about to go down. Don't even think about looking away, because Elijah's about to show exactly what happens when you push the wrong man too far. By the time the sun rose over LA, Elijah Robinson's name was already spinning in headlines faster than a Wall Street ticker. Black CEO rejects $500 million deal after TSA racial profiling. Elijah Robinson just showed the world what integrity looks like. Not everything has a price tag, and he proved it. The noise was deafening. Cable news couldn't stop saying his name. Financial blogs were scrambling to explain why a man would walk away from $500 million. Even business schools were tweeting his quote like it belonged in textbooks. But Elijah, he wasn't giving interviews. He didn't need lights or microphones. He had something better, his own words. Late that morning, he opened his phone and typed slowly, carefully, not because he was worried about the reaction, but because he knew this was about more than him. This was about every person who'd ever been pulled aside, talked down to, dismissed, doubted, degraded, or delayed simply for existing in the wrong skin in the wrong place. Then he hit post. Today, I walked away from a $500 million deal, not because I don't value growth, but because I refuse to grow inside a system that only respects me when I'm quiet, dressed a certain way, and perfectly packaged. I don't want my son, or my nephew, or any kid who looks like me, to think dignity is something they have to trade in to succeed. I didn't lose anything today. I finally stood up without lowering my voice. I won't be silent anymore. That post cracked the internet in half. Comments flooded in by the second. Likes turned into shares. Shares turned into headlines. It was no longer a story. It was a signal. And Richard Manning, the man from Atlantic Equity, the man with the suit, the tie, the Elijah, we're still partners, right? Tone, called again, then sent an email marked urgent. But Elijah didn't pick up, because this wasn't about mending fences. This was about letting the fence burn and planting something better in its place. By mid-afternoon, Atlantic Equity released a hollow, prepackaged statement. While we respect Mr. Robinson's decision, we acknowledge differences in vision and schedule ultimately led to a mutual decision to part ways. It was a performance, a soft landing. But nobody was buying it, not the press, not social media, and definitely not the people who saw what really happened. And while they spun their version, the world watched TSA fumble for theirs. Under pressure from every angle, frictioned news anchors, community leaders, politicians, the agency blinked. They launched a formal internal review. The 2 officers involved were temporarily relieved of duties pending investigation. The phrasing was careful, lawyer-proof, but people saw through that too, because the victory wasn't in the statements. It was in the spark Elijah had lit. High school seniors from Detroit started tweeting about choosing HBCUs over Silicon Valley internships. Tech founders in Atlanta began hosting panels on equity and access. Black investors were openly discussing how to build our own capital pipelines. And in Elijah's own inbox, hundreds of messages. You gave me the courage to walk into my boardroom without shrinking. You stood for all of us, and you didn't blink. I sent your post to my son. He said, now I know I can say no too. The noise, the momentum, it was everywhere. But later that evening, Elijah didn't sit in front of cameras or scroll through coverage. He sat somewhere quieter, somewhere real. His sister's porch in Pasadena, cool breeze, creaking wood under his feet, and the quiet hum of a neighborhood that felt like home. His nephew, maybe 9 or 10, was sitting beside him with a tablet in his lap, focused, tongue sticking slightly out the corner of his mouth, drawing. What you working on? Elijah asked. The boy turned to the screen. It was a logo, a hexagon with a spark at the center, the one Elijah had built from scratch, the one that had been stamped on contracts, conference badges, and keychains across the country. You think it looks cool? The boy asked. Elijah smiled, not the polished business kind, but the soft, knowing kind. I think it looks like something that matters, he said. The boy paused, serious now. Uncle Elijah, were you scared when they stopped you? Elijah looked out across the street, watched a few kids ride by on bikes. The world kept turning, but something inside him had shifted. No, he said after a moment, I wasn't scared. Then he turned to face his nephew fully. I just realized silence has a price, and I've been paying it my whole life. We all have, but not anymore. The boy nodded. Maybe he didn't understand all of it, not yet, but he understood enough. He understood the weight in his uncle's voice, the truth behind his calm. And Elijah? For the first time in years, he felt something most people chase their whole lives. He felt free, not because he won a fight, but because he chose not to play the game on their terms anymore. And that was worth more than any deal.